Hi, welcome to More Christ. I'm Marcus. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Owen Lenihan. Owen is an independent journalist and researcher. He's written for several publications, including The Federalist, European Conservative, Gript, Daily Caller, Quillette, Post Millennial, and more. He's the author of the recent best-selling book Vandalisation Ireland: How the Government, NGOs, Academia, and the Media Are Engineering a New Globalist Ireland. So, just to begin, then, Owen, I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about your background and maybe a few of the key moments that in your life that have led you to this place that you find yourself in now.
Oof. Would you like me to talk about my adult life, or would you like to talk a bit about my childhood, which specifically led to maybe some of the themes in the book?
Yeah, that'd be great, even from your
Aye, why
childhood.
not? Let's go for it. I grew up in County Clare on the edge of the Burren, and I had a very unusual upbringing, I suppose, in many ways. My father was a folklorist, a storyteller. He gathered folklore from all across the Burren. He has the largest private collection of folklore in the country. And I used to go out with him. I was a bit of an assistant, I suppose. I'd carry his microphone for him. But I would go out into the Burren with him, and we would go into the old cabins, of these old lads. And it was like stepping back 200 years. You would go compact dirt floors, all the beautiful black cast iron wares over the fire to make the cup of tea and whatnot. All bachelors, old farming bachelors. And it was a real cling on, to for me that was normal, but as I became more aware and did more research, I realized just how rich it was and how lucky we were. Say people, I think you're much younger than me. I'm just turned 42, 43 actually, but a generation just before me had access to this amazing fireside culture where these old men would have been rightly celebrated, where a night out in the court, or where a house would have been just jammed with life, with people, with community talking. What initially captured my attention and my imagination and what I grew up with is very much faith. Not just twee stories, was the fairy faith, because the Burren is famous for it. We're famous for our dancing, but also our folklore. Um, and there, it was amazing to hear these old lads telling their stories and about their absolute belief in the faith. And then when I was a little older and I did my master's in archaeology in Galway, I wanted to look at it on a more deeper level. And so I went around and interviewed a lot of these old lads who are still remaining. I looked at the archaeological monuments that kept popping up in their stories, particularly ring forts. And it was fascinating to me how the stories influence behavior. So, for example, a common motif in the folklore, which I heard a lot of fellas, in fact, I referenced it in the preface. One, Mikey Griffey, who was a phenomenal storyteller, he tells a story about, the death car, and how he heard this one night rattling into the local graveyard, and how it was to announce a death in the area. And sure enough, it happened. But what I found very interesting was the stories where of drunken men coming home, say, and they would go through a certain field, somebody else's property, and they would be caught by the fairies supposedly and held there overnight. And so these are nice stories until you dig deeper and you cross-reference with multiple people who were there, and you begin to put it together and realize just how strongly it regulated behavior. So, for example, if these people, they weren't just stories, because you had some people who would walk 5 or 10 miles around the long way, 10 miles instead of 5 miles home the short way, because they were afraid of certain places and certain locations.
Uh-huh.
So in this way, they very clearly manifest and regulated behavior. Same with, and that it went down to multiple things. You never let your cows into a fairy fort, or your cows will get sick and die. You never cut bushes there, or you might get a thorn, blood poison, die, and so on. So I grew up in this very unusual kind of culture, and it's slotted in like completely naturally alongside religion. There was absolutely no discrepancy between the countryman's fairy faith and his religious faith. And they would tell you that too, that for them, and this is something I love about Irish Christianity in general, Irish Catholicism, sorry, is just you see the fingerprints all over of how things, were accommodated, how the two accommodated each other throughout. And so one of those being that the story that often popped up is the story of the fallen angels, that as God kicked out the rebellious angels from heaven, and they were scattered through sky, land, sea, under the earth. Those were perfectly explained as being the fairies, you know. And there's no other origin stories too, but these two were able to blend seamlessly together. And in the mind of the Irish countryman, they were able to blend these two things together, and both regulated life in a very profound way in the countryside. You know, just as he would go to his mass on a Sunday and he would organize his life around the various holidays and whatnot. As I say, at night he would be very careful not to come home the wrong road, or he would make sure that he had his yard clean, and so on and so on. And so I found this to be a very rich elements of that were there in my youth. And I found it to be just so extraordinarily rich and so extraordinarily unique. You can't find this anywhere else, anywhere in Western Europe. It's long gone, and industrialization wiped that all out 200 years ago and more. So I just thought, how extraordinary, unique, how lucky are we? How rich is this? And then I think that as the Celtic Tiger came along, and of course, there's elements of that beforehand. I mentioned in the book how when RTE went on the air, and there was this American anthropologist, Lawrence Millman, who came to Ireland, and he wrote how he never saw anyone take to television quite like the Irish did, and he saw just the drastic and sad effect it had on fireside culture and identity. Just that, whereas, you know, we were famous for these rambling nights out, for these fairy stories, for these, you know, just meeting up, having a drink, meeting your neighbours, getting the news from the world, what was going on, that overnight, that was very rapidly wiped out by the advent of television in the 1970s, which left us first with a split of, are we American or English, in culturally speaking, what was being pumped into us? But what he noted, and I think is correct, and it came to a head in the Celtic Tiger, is it engendered a sense of self-hatred, our backwardness. They thought that this fairy fate and our country ways, these vestiges that had lasted longer than anywhere else, somehow made us primitive, instead of realizing that, no, that makes us special. That during the Celtic Tiger, you know, when the first flashes of money came to the country, you know, a lot of this was thrown out and seen as backwards and shameful. And at that point, I was an archaeologist. I was working rescue archaeology, mainly out of Galway, but all up and down the West Coast. And I was a bit disenchanted with it because of just the rate of change, and how, at best, if you went into a site, you were given a week, and all you're doing then is just ripping things out of the ground. There are still unfulfilled reports sitting in offices, archaeological offices all around the country from back then, which means that all these archaeological landscapes are destroyed. Because they've never entered a record. You know, we have no idea of what's been taken out. But the final nail in the coffin for me was when they put, you know, the M3 through the Hill of Tara landscape. Mm-hmm. Now, people always say, they didn't put it through the Hill of Tara. Yeah, they didn't put it through the Hill of Tara, but no, every archaeological site is a landscape. It's what is connected to it. And the Hill of Tara landscape itself, where they did put the road, has the highest density of monuments of any archaeological landscape in the country. So it was absolutely a devastating act of cultural vandalism. And then they had the Hill of Allen across too, which they rooted out for aggregates for their roads and things, which is also hugely important for our folklore that's, again, associated with Fionn McCool. So that was back then. I realised that Fianna Fáil in particular had already decided that they do not want anything to do with Irish identity, culture, particularly these deep-rooted folkloric folkways. Not just folklore, but folkways that, you know, so that being faith, fairy faith, religious faith, just the stories, the rambling houses, that was for them shameful and backwards, and they were going to pursue an aggressively modernist agenda. And that's what came to pass. I left Ireland because I was disgusted by that. I should never have left Ireland. I was the last person in the world who should leave Ireland because I was so rooted in it, you know. But I just literally couldn't take it. I couldn't watch it fall apart like that. And I left in 2007 at the height of the boom, you know, because to me there was no height of the boom. There was a bit of cash coming in, but the stripping out of our identity was just horrific. And yeah, what's come to pass has been shocking. But back then, I had no way to fight back against it because people just weren't ready. They weren't, you know, they hadn't yet seen how bad it would get, and people had enough money in their pocket. I had gone before the crash, say. So now I've been really stunned the past few years. So, well, actually, what I had to do first was just cut completely because if you immigrate, you can't be wallowing in the old country or you die. It's as simple as that. It's profoundly depressing and miserable. If you have to try and find a way to cut, if or else you just curl up in a ball. So I did that, and I went into teaching over here. I got my doctorate over here. I started teaching student teachers over here. Then I started getting into journalism, and I actually started focusing on America, and I helped write some major reports over there on Antifa before it became fashionable, and I got a nice thank you for that. I got Antifa attacking me in my job and
Mhm.
abuse and whatnot. And that was fine. I had just recovered from that when Ashleen Murphy was brutally murdered. And despite all my best efforts to cut that, just radicalized me. After that, I just said, I can't do it. I can't turn a blind eye because, of course, I have nieces and nephews, brothers and sisters, mother and father, wide circle of friends still back in Ireland. Of course, it's still real to me. And if I can do something, I have to. That was the way I looked at it. And so that's how I got to this. I started writing a few articles about what was going on. And then in August of 2024, I decided, look, there's no point in me just shouting into the void on social media. It does help people, of course. It does reassure people that, my articles, I know a lot of people fed back and said, look, this is great that you're writing this. And I know it helped a lot of people feel heard in their what they were also seeing, their concerns with Ireland. And so what I did with this was that I decided that the book, I wanted it to be a chronicle for all of you know yourself, the thousands and thousands of people who are disillusioned with the way Ireland is going, who are angry, who have been labelled and abused, who've lost family members who won't talk to them because they consider them crackpots or whatnot. I put a huge effort into writing this as a chronicle of these times, 480 sources, so that it's dense with fact and because so that it can't be disproven or easily dismissed, say. And what I really wanted was, yes, just to give the people in my own network a kind of a sense of, yes, you're seen, but also the mission here was that, and I talk one of the chapters in the book that a big reason why the country is falling apart is because the national media have abdicated their responsibility to democracy by jumping into bed with the government. And it was clear to me that unless we can get around them, there's nothing we can do. So I wrote the book with the intention of trying to reach the 65 plus demographic of voters who are Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's core base. And if we could put this book in their hands, I think we could do something. We could shift minds because they are, of course, obviously, there are mothers and fathers, there are aunts and uncles, they're reasonable people. They've just been completely and utterly betrayed by
Yeah.
the information that's put in front of them. So that was
Well,
a very long way. That's why I was shocked. I was saying, do you really want me to go there?
thanks for that, Owen. No, and whilst there's elements that are very disheartening there, obviously, the way our nation has gone. There's also a great hope, I think, and I've come across in my own life personally. My wife and I went back to do oral storytelling with storytellers of Ireland and go to different places around the country and engage with storytelling now. And my friend
Fantastic.
Dr. Martin Shaw is a renowned storyteller from England with roots in Ireland. He's traveling around Ireland. Him and Tommy Tiernan did a tour recently, kind of going back to the old mythic ways. And there seems to
Fantastic.
be this renaissance that I think is in line with what you're describing as something that we look at the in a cost benefit analysis, so to speak. Some of us are now looking beyond the kind of materialistic paradigm and just the profit motive or what have you, and we are concerned with the
Yes.
social capital, that ancient heritage that you're talking about. And from my perspective, even though unfortunately many Christians have been antithetical to those older folk ways in some cases, there's the flip side where the church at its best lifts them up, and C.S. Lewis, folks like that, talk about Jesus as the myth made fact, and we can, through the Christian prism, appreciate and elevate all those wonderful traditions and folk ways. And my friend Father Conor McDonough in Galway, he's this series Treasure Island where he's traveled around some of these sites and talked about it, and he helped me to understand, in contrast to this kind of modern myth of the Christian versus the older mythology, a lot of the myths that we have come to us precisely from the monks and some of these folks. So, like the story of Cuchulainn that we're
Absolutely.
familiar with, he that was written down, even though it was an oral story. It was written down in Bangor Abbey, and they give Cuchulainn these Christ-like characteristics and the things that we love about a lot of these folk tales and so on are the Christianized elements, and we can't easily
Absolutely.
dissect the two.
This is a really interesting element I haven't gotten to speak about actually on any of the podcasts I've been on. But the Catholic Church, you know, and I know because of what happened in the early 2000s with all the various reports that came out and whatnot, that faith was absolutely crushed in the church. But again, you have to look, and you know, there's a lot of Charles McQuaid, De Valera. You know, it's these very surface level quips that actually people aren't don't know their stuff at all. It's very well worth going deeper in. Sorry, I'm wheezing, and you can see just how important the Catholic Church was throughout the course of Irish history, particularly during the height of the penal laws and whatnot. Prior to 1850, in the Synod of Thurles, that's where we really went after that ultramontane, more direct from Rome kind of, and following the structural elements.
Mhm.
Prior to that, the Catholic priest was in the dirt mud hovels with the hungry and the dispossessed. It was a very intimate relationship between the priest and the people, extremely so. That they as you said, they were partaking of these traditions because they were of these traditions. That split between very much the folk and the church came only after that 1850 synod. But prior to that, it was an extremely close relationship, and you can't deny. And anyone who does is just fooling themselves the importance of the Catholic Church in education in that time and keeping. So even though the Irish people were utterly dispossessed, say from Cromwell through to the 1800s, mid 1800s, utterly impoverished, that the aim of the penal laws was to keep them explicit. It was explicitly to keep Irish people illiterate, ignorant of their past, ignorant. The
Mhm.
Catholic Church in that time, these who acted more as wandering kind of almost scholars, were it just can't be underestimated. There was an example I have in the book there of de Tocqueville, who famously wrote about the American Civil War as well. He came to Ireland briefly, and he talks about an unknown village somewhere in Galway or Mayo that he passed through, and he was just struck that even when he went into the mud huts, that these villagers who had nothing, they made sure they had two things: a house for their priest and a schoolhouse,
Mhm.
because these were absolutely vital to them. And so they were there in their just rags, starving. There was no chance of a job. They had, barefoot in there. But the depth of education and knowledge, he said, was shocking. He'd never come across anything like it, because this was valued entirely throughout this time, and that was again because of the traveling bards. So there was a lot of itinerant teachers, but certainly also the local priests who were down in those hollows with those unseen people.
And even the Protestant landed gentry, it would be remiss of me not to mention the work of folks like Lady Gregory and how they preserved a lot of these traditions. And obviously, folks like W.B. Yeats, in his own very idiosyncratic way, has helped us to appreciate some of this lore.
Well,
Um,
again, the very real case too, later of, the big bogeyman for a lot of people. I have huge criticisms of Eamon de Valera, but he he's commissioned a schools commission, which sent school children out to every corner of the country in the 1930s, was it late 30s? And they recorded the folklore of the nation. And that is now up in archives in UCD, is it? But it's again one of the largest folklore archives anywhere in the world. So I think it's sad that he didn't do more to keep it alive, rather that they put it in the archive. That would be my criticism. But you cannot criticize the man for undertaking something completely unparalleled anywhere else in Europe, and that in this massive folk gathering. So,
absolutely. I think
and
so.
again, when we hear of, like you said, the Mr. McQuaid, who was the big demon with the flappy cloak, and he got a lot wrong. Again, though, it shows exactly what you're talking, that all of these men understood that the folk ways were on a par with this religious, that it was all part of one Irish identity.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Owen. And another common link that we share is my friend Dr. Jared Casey, who I've had the pleasure of speaking with a number of times. Who came to my wife Grace and I's wedding and everything.
Oh, wow.
And he's a pure gentleman, and I know he's been
What
a
an
friend
honor.
and
Yeah.
influence. So I'm wondering, to what extent has he been an influence on you and your work, and maybe why should Irish people be listening to voices like his?
Well, first of all, it's been very influential. I've had the honor of interviewing him for my own YouTube channel, and I've been on with him a couple of times on X Spaces as well. His book, I usually have it to hand. It's inside in the other room, but on anarchy, anarchic libertarianism is just brilliant because it explains libertarianism very simply for people like me who knew nothing about it. But Ireland's he's just one of Ireland's greatest thinkers. You wouldn't know it because they don't let him on the television. But
Mhm.
so why are his ideas so influential, you ask? Well, for me, when I go through this, chapter 2 in the book is called A Crippled Democracy. And one of the things I lay out in that is how it's not just that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael coalesce in 1958 around a plan for direct foreign investment and joining the EU and putting all our eggs into those two baskets. Um, and that continues through to the present. But, there's various steps to that. In 1995, that's when we stopped being able to supply enough workers to support the amount of industry coming in from America. So that's when Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael say, we're not doing it for them anyway. Let's just bring in whoever and just keep the money, keep the cash, the receipts, corporation tax receipts flowing in. So they start putting that FDI economy on steroids by bringing in a 12.5% corporation tax. And so that's the economic history of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that we all know, that it doesn't work for the Irish people, it works for them and their corporation tax. And they will bring in as many people as they deem necessary to keep that going. The statistics for big tech in particular are shocking how the overwhelming majority now of people who are being employed are being imported from non-EU countries, primarily India, to fill these positions. So you have to ask, what's the point? But the bigger issue there is that Sinn Féin completely support these positions also. They have supported the 12.5% tax back when it was a live discussion. And economically, when any election comes around and you compare their manifestos, and I have, you'll see that there is no difference between the offerings of these parties. Fianna Fáil will say we'll offer an extra 1,000 beds a year in hospitals. Fine Gael say we'll offer 1,010, and Sinn Féin will say, look how socialist we are. We're going to offer 1,020. And that's, this is the big hoo-ha. They're all the exact same. They're all offering the exact same economic model. So this is what Jared Casey offers a different view on. He offers the idea of a laissez-faire model, a libertarian economic model. I suppose they call it Austrian economics now, but he's offering he's trying to hark back, and this is where I agree strongly with him, and this is where it's very influential in the book. I start in the book with a very Casey-like worldview. I start the book by looking at how Cumann na Gael started out trying to have a laissez-faire economic model that is, minimal state intervention, tried to spur homegrown industry. Now, they couldn't succeed at that time because we were straight out of a colony and we were a pre-industrial nation. We just needed to build houses for people. We needed to secure a basic survival for people. Then we were hit by the Great Depression in the 30s. Then Eamon de Valera came in 1932 and said, hey, I'll give you all the goodies if you vote for me. And he got the country hooked on socialism. By the time Cumann na Gael had a look in again, well, Fine Gael at that point, after 17 years of Eamon de Valera, they realized they would have to offer a socialist offering too, meaning, buy people off at elections, or you're never going to get in again. So Cumann na Gael did try to balance the books. They put great effort into it, and they did a remarkable job considering where they were at that time. And that is what Casey and what I suggest in the final chapter of this book is what we need to get back to. What happened in the 1930s was that Eamon de Valera went to war with the British state for economically. So they had the trade war, which was ultimately disastrous for Ireland. You can say that intentions were great because he was trying to, for him, nationalism was economic freedom as well, of course. So the vast majority of our exports were going to Britain, which was meat, grains, the colonial economy.
Hmm.
So he tried, in fairness to him, to expand Irish domestic economy, but it was sloppily done, and he eventually ended up just having to import a bunch of English companies to try and make up job recruitment, so Rowan Trees and various shoe producers, to try and fudge the numbers. But when his economy collapsed anyway, in the late 50s, with devastating mass emigration to boot, Ireland was, in a hard fix, and that's where Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael came together to start this path, this of foreign direct investment that we've never really gotten past. We still pursue it aggressively today, but one of the chief elements of that has been the total abandonment of domestic industry. So again, if you look at how, if you're a friend of the government, let's say the press, they pay 0% VAT, whereas, the hospitality industry, which is our biggest employer with nearly 200,000 people, has been paying 13% until, well, they've dropped it now in the most recent budget, but only to 9.5%, which again makes no sense. Plus, they've taken away their customer base by giving away hotels in tourism areas to mass immigration and IPAS centres. So everything this government does and has done since the 50s has been to the detriment of domestic economic production and domestic industrialisation. And that's what KC and what I would certainly strongly try to advance an economic model that places the onus on starting at the grassroots, starting on developing Irish industry. But every economic model is also a political theory or philosophy. So you can't just say, "Oh, look, let's just bang in a couple of factories and all these, or give money to people to set up factories, Irish people," because they'll fail if they don't exist in a broader political system where they can succeed. And that has to be, so that's where I like this libertarian economic model. It's based on the concept of trade between willing partners and willing individuals. And that should start at the grassroots level. So if you produce a bunch of eggs and I produce a bunch of excess pork, I will swap them, right? That's the basic level at the medieval functioning level. But let's bring it up to the present. In this Dunvarna in 2018, the government offered the white family who own all the hotels in the area obscene money, as we now know, we see with all these IPAS contracts, to house immigrants. White wanted to take the money, and the entire community bucked against him. Why? Because those hotels had an ancient, very old tourism industry completely dependent on them. So if the hotels go, then the local pub goes, the local restaurant goes, the Burren Tour company goes, and so on and so on. And so the community got together and they took a vote, and more than 90% of all people in Lisdoonvarna voted against him turning the hotel into an IPAS centre. And he stuck his two fingers up at him and said, "Don't care, I'm taking the money, see you later." And that devastated the local economy. It made him overnight a multi-millionaire and a new aristocracy. And all of this was done against consent. It was done because an outside force, the government in Dublin, came in like an imperial force and said, "We're going to disrupt your entire economic balance here, your entire community, past, present, and future. And we're going to make this person a multi-millionaire agent of the state, basically. And if you have a problem with it, we're going to start station Gardaí all around his base and batter the living daylights out of you." So that, you see, is the clash of what we have. That is modern Ireland and modern Irish economics, in its end product. It's authoritarian, whereas a libertarian model understands that the people come first. And if you start like that, the community base, 93% can't be shoved in the corner while the 7% take the spoils. That's not how it works. Unless you want social unrest and unless you want the inevitable to happen, which is what, 31 fires in IPAS centres by August 2024. It's inevitable when you are authoritarian and when you pursue um, uh, 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 an utterly authoritarian political model. That's what's going to happen. So Casey's model is not just the best for Irish people, best possible outcome for Irish people. It's also the smartest model, the path of least conflict and resistance. And we've never done it in Ireland.
Hmm. And I should say, there's a kind of stereotype about libertarians as if they are just want people to be free to do whatever they want. But Jared is a social conservative. He's a Christian, and
Very important.
libertarianism is the minimum standard. The emphasis on non-violence and non-aggressive principle and all
Very,
these
very
things.
much so.
But he would suggest that all those folkways that we're talking about, our communities need to be leveled, layered, I should say, and in terms of making our decisions, we can and should be thinking about the social costs. We should be thinking about the cost to the land and so on.
That's where why I'm drawn to him, because
Mm,
this is the crucial thing. Just and I never used the word libertarianism in the book. I use a laissez-faire economy with a socially conservative social policy, and this is and the point you make is absolutely crucial, because some libertarians who are just economically libertarian and don't pursue a social policy, they are just globalists. They are just let the market decide, kick open the borders, kick open business is good.
mm,
I absolutely do not agree with that and would never, because like you just pointed to there, that leads to the dilution and the eventual destruction of the folkways and the national identity. And so for me, um, see, this is a conversation that people need to have, and we need to have in Ireland, is that what is an economy? Where does it rank in terms of priorities, and what is its function? And for me, an economy must always, always be subservient to people. And by people, I mean the nation, our identity, which is the collective of people, identity, folklore, history, archaeology, landscape, everything that makes us uniquely Irish.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks for that, Owen. I most appreciate that about your work alongside Jared's. I think that's exactly what we need at this moment in time. And I want to zoom out now for a little minute.
Mhm,
You mentioned a moment ago that about all these fires, different IPAS centres, and you do
mhm,
use this very strong language. You begin by describing Ireland as a nation on fire, and
mhm.
I think it's especially apt now, given the recent case in Dublin where the 10-year-old was raped by an immigrant, and that resulted in this extensive rioting. Once again, I think mishandled by the state, and it seems to be part of a wider trend. So, what are some of the underlying currents that have inspired these recent riots, and how does that play into this description that you're offering?
Well, right, because so that was chosen precisely to reflect that a nation on fire. It's not just because there's 31 fires, but so again, I was sitting down writing this in August 2024, and it is sad that it perfectly predicted essentially what happened in Dublin last week, and it will continue to predict it because they refuse to change. But let's look at what the key factor on that was. So something utterly unique. I've never seen it in any other country. I've never seen it in any democracy, any Western nation was so we in 2022 took in 100,000 Ukrainians. The vast majority, that was way above the representation of any other nation. Plus, we gave them the workers' unemployment allowance, way above what was being offered. People in general threw open their doors willingly and lovingly and said, "We want to help you." You know, people were very good in that moment. I would say the vast majority were. But then, even as hotels started being requisitioned to put them in, and these hotels were overwhelmingly in tourism hotspots, beauty spots. So, in the first year that Ireland took in 100,000 Ukrainians, and that following summer, over 100,000 jobs in the Western Seaboard and tourism were lost, and still people were quite happy. So the Irish were above and beyond. We were in our warmth and open in how we threw open our doors at great personal expense in the areas that could least afford it. But what then very quickly happened, we saw that in McGowan House in Innis, was that in 2023 they started cycling out a lot of these Ukrainian refugees to other parts of the country or out into private accommodation or elsewhere. And people thought, oh, great, we're going to get our hotel back. We're going to get our tourism back. We did our bit. We're great people. Now let's move on. Yahoo. But they didn't. They started cycling in North Africans and Arabs. And people said, whoa, wait a minute, what's this now? And it slowly dawned on them that they opened their communities with the best of intentions, only to find that it was now what was it should have been or was promised a temporary solution was now a permanent solution. And that the people who were arriving were now overwhelmingly male, illegal immigrants from North Africa and from Arab countries, and nobody had agreed to this. Now, a crucial moment was when Leo Varadkar, speaking from Iceland at the time, when McGowan House crisis blew up. What happened was a bunch of locals, they blocked the pathways to McGowan House, the road, a bunch of farmers, and they put out their tractors and whatnot and said, no, we don't want this. This isn't what was agreed upon. And he tacitly, carefully labeled them racist by saying that, the Irish people aren't racist, but some are racist, in that kind of way. He tacitly, he labeled them racist. And that rhetoric began to grow, and that's what was taken up in the national media. And what very quickly came out, the language that came out after McGowan House was that people will have no veto and no consultation. So the mantra was no veto, no consultation. So into small ancient community after small ancient community after small ancient community, all down the west coast, everywhere, but very noticeably down the western seaboard. We had groups of, again, illegal African and Arab men being rammed into communities, often in the middle of the night. No consultation, no veto. So at this point now, you have to step back. Any rational, normal person will step back and say, what is democracy? And how does it function? And what happens if your government rams in a bunch of people overnight that you absolutely did not agree to take on, you have no interest in taking on, and you have absolutely legitimate fears over? What happens when they say, you're going to take them, you're not going to have a choice in it, and if you speak up, we're going to smear you and your community as racist in the media? I have never, ever seen anything like that in the history of any country in the West, that in my lifetime. I've never seen it happen, just that level of authoritarianism and arrogance. And so that's where that chapter on Ireland being a crippled democracy, I trace back to the foundation of the states, and I touched on the high points there already about how Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, later joined by Sinn Féin, essentially came to reflect the same policies, the same ideologies, and they locked down democracy because there was no alternative. If Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael understood that Sinn Féin were silent partners so they moved far to the left over the past 10 decades just to throw them a bone on social matters. But on economic matters, they're all joined at the hip. They're the exact same party. So there was no voting your way out of what was happening in Ireland. And that's what led to astonishing arrogance like that. No veto, no consultation policy. And that, if you push people's backs to the wall and say, screw you, well, what's going to happen? And we saw what happened. We saw what happened in Coolock, in Clonmel. We saw what happened last week in Dublin, and so on. And of course, the big helper in all of this that allowed this to happen, and the smearing of people, was the national media. And that's something maybe we should talk about as well. It's well worth going into, because they were the glue binds this whole mess and allows Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Sinn Féin to get away with how they're running the country. In short, and I go into it in great detail in the book, but in short, they're bought out by the government. Now, we all know that, and we throw that around on social media, whatever. Sure, they're bought out. But I forensically go through it in the book and show, no, they're literally bought off. They are literally forced through cash and pressure, to the pressure of their own economic overreach and greed, to play the government line on all incendiary issues. So that was the last big domino that truly tipped everything over the edge. The Irish national media allowed itself to be bought out by the Irish government, and that meant that there is no one holding any of these parties to account. And once that happens, democracy's over.
Ay, Lord have mercy. And I think part of the problem is especially with what you point out about the media, this framing that they can offer us, and that there's an illusion of diversity. I think you mentioned in different points about you'll have a number of five or six people on a panel, but they all have the same
Right.
basic view of the world. I think there's another interesting
Very
thing,
good. Yeah.
even beyond the kind of crude, you're a racist play. There's this element of even the language of illegal versus legal immigration, and I
Right.
think, as Rafe Heidel Manku, I think it's powerfully argued, even legal immigration is a major problem, and the
Of
governmental
course.
focus on illegal immigration, then it seems, is maybe even a distraction from this
This
grander
is so
problem.
true. No, you're reached. This is so true and so important. The media isn't like, it's not some the propaganda we're facing, and I say that the Irish national media is just a PR wing of the government at this point, and I think I've proven it. But that they're not some, cartoon like villain. Like they're very sophisticated in their ways of deception. So, um, you're right that how they would distract from a bigger issue, which is illegal immigration, which is absolutely destroying the fabric of the country. They'll distract from that by focusing on, yes, on smaller elements of the illegal issue and keep the conversation bogged down there. But it's one of the, just as you said, one that popped into my mind from the book was, take Newtown Mount Kennedy for example, in last year when there was the people stood up at Trudder House to stop that being used as an iPass centre. And that descended into violence and brutal violence by the police, who pepper sprayed, battened, charged even Fatima Gunning, a journalist. But what was just so absurd was that it was quite evident that this was a very large grassroots movement. Certainly, some people came in from other movements to some of these demonstrations from Dublin or whatnot, but the overwhelming majority was a grassroots movement from the locality, Newtown Mount Kennedy. So, what did the national media do, and the Independent in particular? They amplified this other supposed group of grassroots movement. It was, the name escapes me right now, but Newtown Mount Kennedy something for Newtown Mount Kennedy. It doesn't matter. But all it was a people before profit. Also ran, failed politician who got literally a handful, less than 10 people to join them. And because they're being hard left in the media, being staffed by the hard left, even if they're forced and paid by globalist Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, they had a lot of sympathy. And what the media did, like I say, particularly the Independent, was that they would amplify this voice that was just a non-voice. It was an AstroTurf campaign to try and say, well, on one hand, we have these protesters, but on the other hand, we have these protesters. They were trying to give equal weighting when there just
Hmm.
was none. There was the actual protest and AstroTurf way down here where you get, like, it was. So there's so many different ways that the media have lied and spun. They over amplify, they leave out crucial facts, they leave out, there's many, many, many ways to lie. And that's something I tried to bring out, just how deliberate it is, the way that the media have ran cover for the government in these really incendiary topics. The big one, of course, will be always, like you see, after Coolock, after Dublin last weekend, the number one thing you're going to see splashed everywhere is a burnt out police van. And so,
Hmm.
they know what they're doing. Imagery is very powerful. So who sets police vans on fire? Thugs,
Hmm.
scumbags, that kind of thing. And that, again, that puts the fear of God into the plus 65 core demo of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who will say, they're all scumbags and I don't want anything to do with whatever they have to do with. And you see, it's a beautiful way of shutting down the conversation and cocooning that plus 65s who are a generation who are generally comfortable, doing well, enjoying their later years, from seeing the reality of what's really happening to generations that are coming up behind them.
Absolutely, Owen. And I think what you described there, there's also this amplification of the genuine far right elements and these kind of neo-Nazi guys like your man Barrett, and they'll focus in on that and then try to typecast the whole
Absolutely.
population based on those figures. But like, to whatever extent those folks are an actual problem, and this white identitarian identity, you go into the kind of myth of whiteness in the book, but as to the extent that those folks embrace it, I think is also antithetical to Irish national and Christian identity. And that concerns me in the sense that I want to avoid both ditches and go down
Right.
the road with Casey and with Padraig Pearse and some of those guys.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say to that, and
Oh, it's a
how might we
difficult
deal
one.
with those
Oh,
elements?
this is now you're getting me in trouble. This is the one area that I get in trouble with in social media. Generally, I get a lot of great responses, mainly because I try to be very rational. I try to back up what I say with evidence, and I'm not reactionary, And but the one area that the right doesn't seem in Ireland doesn't seem to want to have a conversation about is that there are different factions on the right in Ireland. Um, Justin Barrett, who was the leader and founder of the National Party, now leads Clonaireann, who are an open National Socialist Party in the vein of Adolf Hitler. That's their aesthetic. They read his books. That's what nobody in their right mind is going to vote for that. And any normal Irish person who sees that is going to think, what on earth are these lunatics doing?
Mhm.
But people are so angry now on the right that they're willing to shack up and make alliances with anyone just if they think it'll cause a breakthrough. But they're not playing it out strategically because right now the national media, as you rightly said, they lump everyone in together to make them all far right and taboo. But that's a dirty tactic. But we've seen that elsewhere, like in Germany as well, here where I'm in, with the rise of the AFD. But what will happen is eventually Ireland will get a populist party together or a Christian right party or an alliance that's very electable. And when that happens, you see, that's when the national media will really worry, and that's when they will start looking a little closer. And anyone that's associated with the likes of that will be absolutely untouchable, and it will sink the movement. And again, there's a huge incentive there. Like I say in that chapter on with the media and the way they're bought off. One of the biggest ways they're bought off is advisory positions. The vast majority of these, so Harris, Martin, and the last government, Gorman, they all were paying out €1 million a year on advisors. And these were overwhelmingly, or not well, disproportionately drawn from Irish media journalists
Mhm.
and editors of the various papers. So it's the best job any politics writer or editor can get is a government advisor position. So as soon as there's a chance to get a nice smear piece in there, like we see today with the release of a smear piece about Aontú the day after the presidential election, the huge success of Spoil the Vote. They will do it because that's how the media operates. They're the watchdog of the government. So people on the right need to be smart. And you don't even have to be smart to realize that associating with open Hitler enthusiasts is stupid.
Mhm.
Then there's other elements too that on the right that are very questionable, that need to be talked about and haven't been talked about. And I do think that's our job, people who are on the right. We need to um, be very clever. We will have twice as much um, um, inspection as anyone on the left say by the national media. We won't be treated fairly. Anyone who thinks you will be is a fool. So you have to keep a clean house. You have to be smart. But you also have to be moral. You have to run a moral campaign anyway. Who wants like National Socialism? There are some elements of other parties, again, I hardly want to mention because I always get abused by them. But there's another party on the right, hell, National Party, who have a lot of people who are just openly anti-Semitic and openly racist. I get hounded by them and called Jew anytime I ask simply for clarity on their policies. For example, when they talk about remigration, I ask them, what is remigration? And they get very angry about that because there's a lot of room to hide with the term remigration. Does remigration mean all illegal immigrants who came to the country? I back that 100%. Does remigration mean um, if I've married a Colombian, then my wife and our offspring kids who are not purely Irish have to go back also? Some would say yes. I don't back that, obviously, because we've always made room in the tribe for that. There was always a case. Now, again, because the government just broke all the rules and went like ramas and opening the door and letting everybody in, that nuance has been lost. Like, so for example, when I was growing up, the example I always use is the O'Halpines. The O'Halpines, with one Fijian parent and one Irish parent, went on, look at them with their master Irish speakers, hurlers, teachers, seamlessly integrated. Anyone who, I can't understand anyone who would want to deport them, for example, in that time. Now I understand that some people are angry. I disagree with them, but I understand their anger. But we can't have any unified Irish movement if there isn't absolute clarity and truth as to what everyone stands for,
Mhm.
because then you can make your alliances. For so it's just so tricky. Look, if we get really into the weeds on it and really how tricky it is, let's take the example today of AN2. So it turns out there was a group chat. Some lads were using very spicy words in there, um, and they somebody who was in the group also using spicy words allegedly got annoyed, leaked it first to Pater Tubin and then to the press, and then a bit to embarrass whatever. So these young lads now have been named in the papers today. Their lives are over. Their career, their reputation is ruined before they even had a start at life. And the question is, was what they were saying, like, were they serious about it? Was it banter? Was it what, was it the frustration of maybe kids who know they'll never own a house in Ireland? We know that 40% of young working people live at home.
Mhm.
If they say, if they, get a bit spicy about that, is that the correct punishment for the crime? What I would have done in that case, Pater Tobin, he see, this is where now politics comes in. Pater Tobin kicked him out straight away and said, "This don't represent his rent." I understand that absolutely. You know why he would do that, but he could also have taken the opportunity to put an arm around and say, if we don't put an arm around these guys, put their absolutely reject what they've said, and take efforts to make sure that they see things differently. That if we don't do that and put an arm around them, then they're going to naturally end up with the National Party, or naturally with Clonairen, by the time the media have absolutely destroyed their futures and completely shamed them and shunned them in their own communities.
Mhm.
So I would have said that would have been a stronger response for N2 in a way, would have been to, because now the winner here has been the National Party. And this is an issue I brought up in the book. And so this is an interesting case study, because I said that I don't, the National Party for me, they're just pursuing a European identitarian agenda, which is alien to Irish politics. It's just as alien as the social justice stuff coming in on the left, that it's not an Irish solution to an Irish problem. It's a outsider solution that's very extreme, but it's not going to appeal to the mass of voters. However, it can create a highly radicalized and angry cohort of young men. And so there today now was an opportunity to keep some from maybe falling into that route, and showing that it's not black and white. Because right now things seem black and white for these people, young people in particular. They have no hope at ever hope owning their own home. Migration is the best option available to a lot of them. They don't recognize their country when they see their culture and identity being mocked, or at least slipping away. So we have to understand that there needs to be some way of keeping them out of radicalization, because now, for the first time in my lifetime, there are people like Justin Barrett and Clonairen who are actively trying to radicalize them, who are actively trying to get them to pursue non-diplomatic, or non-democratic pursuits. And that's going to end up very messy. And I say that in the book, that that can happen, it will happen. And I blame the government first and foremost for creating the scenario in which it can happen, and in which this kind of extreme politics it can be bred.
Mhm.
But that's that end of things is not electable. Whatever's going to come out initially, I think, will come out of what we've seen percolate through in the last two referenda and out of this presidential election, that there will, I think, have to be some kind of an alliance or a coalition going forward. I would like to see Sharon Keoghan and her army of councillors, which she showed that she has real power with. Um, I'd like to see her step in with some other strong candidates like Carol Nolan. So people that showed during this presidential election that they are proper conservatives or can be relied on by a conservative movement. I'd like to see them move in with some breakthrough stars like Elaine Mullally and, electable people like that. And I think they all need to sit down and draft a strong vision for what their party is going to be, because Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael are nothing parties. They have no ideologies, never had. They just drift. They always outsource their social policy to the church, and they've always just drifted where they think the votes are, which is why they drifted so far left the past decade. So I would like to see whatever party emerges. Of course, there'll be wriggle room there. I hope there's a strong libertarian economic influence there. There's got to be differences, but they're going to have to find some common ground. And they're going to have to be brave to say that there can't be any common ground with the likes of Barrett. And again, you know, allegedly, Mr. Barrett himself was bragging about it on social media that, you know, there was that Ezra Levant who was assaulted in Dublin last week, that was by a member of their crew. So, I mean, there's no place for this kind of stuff in Irish politics. It's dirty, it's nasty, it's got to go. So I think that, I don't know, I want to see, first of all, in the coming weeks, conversations happening about what is conservatism in the Irish context, what are the key foundational principles of it. I think it'll have to be flexible. I think since the collapse of the Catholic Church, and I say this in the book, it has to be able to accommodate both religious right and atheist right. The example I always use, and the one I have in my head, is to take Ian O'Doherty, who is a libertarian atheist, and take David Quinn, who is a strongly religious and conservative. Compare those two, their views politically. You know, they're going to align on 9 out of 10 things. And so it's absurd that they wouldn't be in a political party together. You know, if you look at how alike they are in comparison to everything else, every other option that's out there. So that's what we need. We need to have a sense that everyone's aware of how dire things are. Everyone's aware that they are not alone the solution, that they're going to have to negotiate, and that we build something from there.
Thanks for that, Owen. And I think what you said about the that putting your arm around people, and I think the old Christian canard of love the sinner but hate the sin. People kind of very flippant about it and dismissive of it, but that is such
Right.
profound wisdom. And even I, obviously, as a believing Christian, believe that's true anthropologically in some sense, but also in utilitarian terms. If you want to have a non-violent society and for people to be able to grow over time and not to be judged
Yep.
just by the person that they are 20 years. As you say, I think there's the element of the new technology and people living their lives online in ways that they didn't in the past. And those of us maybe who said silly things as in our teens that did silly things, we don't have that recorded in video. We don't have that
Right,
on
right,
social media.
right.
So we have to be tender to those people and loving, I think, from a Christian perspective. But there's also the societal element, which before we started recording, I brought up the name of Tom Holland and how his book Dominion makes the thesis that even unconsciously we have all these Christian assumptions, Jewish and Christian assumptions, for which makes sense over
Yeah.
thousands of years of history, and it's built into our institutions. We talk about servant leadership and so on and so forth. So if those folks who maybe those Christian atheists, even like Douglas Murray or O'Doherty, some of those guys that you talk about, if we can work together to focus in on those older school kind of
That's where
quasi-liberal
the
views.
folkways again and the archaeology and the history really unites us.
Hmm.
So if you're of the like if you're an atheist and you have but you're proud of who you are and where you come from. I use the example of the Mass Rocks, and the Mass Rocks is one of the heroes throughout the book. It comes back again and again, just as a symbol. I think it should be used more actually as a symbol, and it should be in the modern Ireland. It was a symbol of so many different things: resistance, endurance, so on. But I think it could be a powerful new symbol going forward as well. Because you put an atheist and a very Christian person in front of that mass rock, that's something special to both of them. The atheist can connect with it for its role in our history of revolution and resistance against colonialism. They can look at it and think about their ancestors who would have come here, impoverished, to pray in such a profound and dangerous statement of belief. The Christian person can appreciate it the exact same, but also then have the Christian element, and also any open-minded atheist will understand in that moment. And this again, I don't know how this, you'll know better than me, because I don't want to be telling, people their business either. But again, I wish we had more awareness of the pre-1850 Synod of Thurles idea of Irish Christianity, because there really was no barriers between priest and community back then. There really was, like I say, they were living barefoot together in the same hovels, and again, it's out of that tradition that these Christian leaders risked everything. Early in the penal laws, now it was relaxed early enough, but early in the penal laws, if a priest was caught giving mass at one of these mass rocks, he was shipped off to the New World, and he was never to be seen again. He would be worked to death as a slave, or if he's lucky, work his way out of it. But I think we somehow have to find a sense of reconciliation with the modern church, and we have to find a way to embrace the totality and the entirety of our history, which is why I spend a lot of time going back through that connection. Because if we don't, I don't see how we can fully love ourselves as individuals and as a nation, individuals within a nation, because we have to accept all the parts of what makes us us. And as a atheist, you see, I think a great disservice was done by Stephen Hawking's in that their militant atheism, that it was very much anger driven, and it appealed to a lot of Irish people in particular after the 00s, after the various scandals, the Ferns report and all were published. But I think now, again, I would hope there's a maturing of that relationship, and people can understand that yes, terrible things did happen, and yes, it was bad. Personally, for me, it's quite simple. That 1850 Synod of Thurles, where beforehand it was very much church for and of the people, a folk church. Then going to this ultramontane, which was a hierarchical kind of behind walls, sharply tied to Rome church. That's what, for me personally, again, I don't want to start any fights with anyone. That's what started the rot, because it took the church away from the people directly. And I do think that if we can have a greater awareness of that fact, and maybe we can somehow go back to that pre-1850s church, or celebrate that church, which was easily accommodating of the full totality of Irish identity. I think that there's real potential there. So again, we need to have an awareness of our past, the good and the bad, and we have to have an awareness that neither the good nor the bad define us, that they are all just part of us. And the best thing we can have is a full awareness of all of those, so that whatever it is that we decide will be the foundation of a coming cultural revolution or cultural revival, that it's able to accommodate the religious and the non-religious right. And I do think that that's a very powerful tool. Like you said with Professor Casey, economically laissez-faire, but with a strong cultural revolution or strong cultural revival, I think that sets the groundwork then for whatever party emerges out of that come 2029. Like we can't just not show up on 2029 knocking on doors like we did in the last election and say, hey, vote for me, the guy you've never seen before, who doesn't attend any of your hurling matches, who isn't involved at all in this community. Listen to me rant about immigration for 10 minutes and then vote for me. It's just not going to happen. We need to create this culture where it's okay to vote Conservative, or whatever way you want to label it. Like I say in the book, don't call it Conservative, because people lolly associate it with Margaret Thatcher and it's too easy to cut down. Call it whatever you want, but create that culture now, so that come 2029, not only is it a positive energy behind what people are asked to vote for, but the people who are knocking on doors will be well-known representatives of this in their communities, and they'll be well-known to other communities. So that's all laid out in the last chapter, my vision for Ireland 2.0, as I would call it. And I think that's a vision that probably has elements that a lot of people would share. And I think a lot of people could add more to. Like that's a very skeletal blueprint for a way forward, and I would hope that somebody might take elements of it and add their own elements to it. And, you know,
No, that's great one. And there is that radical trust to your work. I think that's most helpful. And I do, even from a Christian perspective, see that as feasible because the church and the state have gone in different directions. And I think
Mm.
in many ways that's a good thing. And the Christians that you have are going to be smaller in number, but they're going to be very dedicated.
Right.
And those folks can have very organic relationships with one another and with their surrounding societies in ways maybe that top-down model
Yes.
model couldn't, and so on. But
That's a very important point. I think that that's what turned off a lot of people as well, over the past decades with churches. It felt very top down. It like the weight of that was very heavy in Ireland, where it wasn't in other nations. Like Catholicism in other nations just didn't have that weight of being part of the government, being part of the state, and very evidently so. And so I do think exactly what you said there, casting off that yoke, coming back to younger guys kind of saying it's a good thing that the church doesn't have that power and that there isn't a sense of obligation to it, that people who do come and join are doing so with free will and with vigor. And I think that that is absolutely a powerful basis for a movement.
I'm in. I think also there are subtle changes that are reasonably achievable, I think. So the economist David McWilliams recently looked at data from across Europe and he showed how this language of centrist versus far right was so misleading in highlighting that the real center in line with your work is the vast majority of the people who oppose such huge volumes of immigration without integration, and they're being labeled far right whenever the government are the actual extremists. And the data, like your work suggests, empirically bears that out. And he looked at different places in Europe, and surprisingly, in some ways, the exception to the rule is Denmark, who had a kind of center-left government, but they
That's
actually
right.
listened to their people and changed course. Could you speak to that and how you might change course in Ireland?
Well, I always said for me that in relation to Denmark is that I don't care or I never did care so much about left or right, what party, whatever. Once you are a recognizable nation, what Denmark understood was that you keep your fights behind closed door and in the family, meaning no to mass immigration, because mass immigration just skews everything, and it just you don't know all the angles anymore of the national psyche, and who wants what our shared values and needs are, because our values and needs aren't shared anymore, because just simply different cultures have different needs and values and wants. And so it was for me, the Celtic Tiger, the first time around when it crashed. Now, the doors had been open quite a bit, but it wasn't a huge deal, because the way I looked at it was, well, you're a homogenous nation, so you're just going to say, come on, we can pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. We're all in this together. Let's do it. That's one of the real beauties of a homogenous society, is that you understand that history, it's just always ebbs and flows, ups and downs. Economically, it doesn't matter. Sometimes you'll have a leftist in power, sometimes, as long as they abide by the basic foundational rules, which is that you work for the people, and the people here, the nation. As long as you work for the nation, you might get it wrong. You might have an idea I think is totally stupid. That's fine. But they changed the game completely across Europe by kicking open the borders. And that's what's angered a lot of people, in my view. But very importantly, the big ingredient. And so, interestingly enough, there was last week an article in one of the German dailies here which said, finally, said something very similar, which was that, oh, hang on, the AFD are actually just a centrist party. They're just a normal conservative party. They are the CDU, the position the CDU vacated 20 years ago. So that message seems to be percolating down now in the establishment papers and advisors and whatnot, which is very good. It's very important, because people will listen to these people when they say it. That's essential. Now, the only problem I see for Ireland is that we are still heavy. So we're heavy. Let's go. So just because we skipped it, it's in the book. I don't want to give it all away, but heck, we're having a long chat and it's relaxed. The government owns the national media in Ireland, not just the public media RTE, but the private media also. So we all know they bailed out RTE for $750 million. So you're obviously not going to go against your paymaster, even if you want to. But if we want to dig into it a little deeper, we can kind of prove it. They also own the private media. And why? Because three conglomerates, Bauer, the Irish Times Trust, and Media Huis, owns the entire, essentially, media landscape in Ireland. So they own all the big dailies, the radio, and a good chunk of the local papers as well. So they over-leverage themselves in acquiring these such that they're running losses year on year and they're trimming jobs year on year. And the government understand this. So what the government does is they are the biggest advertisers in their papers. They got rid of their 13% VAT. They don't make them rich. They don't give them millions, because if people have millions and they're rich, they have opinions. They give them just enough to survive and to toe the government line. And then there's the other biggest, as we said, there's the big carrot, which is that they dangle, which is the offer of an advisor position for a journalist, which is increasingly one of the more unstable jobs in the country. So advisor job as a government minister, as a government advisor is just, it's a no-brainer for many people who are looking for stability and to own a home, especially in places like Dublin. But the other and very ugly one is Comisiún na Man. Comisiún na Man will dole out grants anywhere from 5 to 40,000 for individual one-off programming, all on government agenda topics. So, for example, on migration, on LGBT stuff, on environment, on the environment. Those are the big three. And if you want to test, is the government bought off? Well, you would say, okay, here are all the people who get grants. Let's look if there's some kind of balance of criticism and positive reviews of government policy in these. And in every single case, you only get a grant if you're backing government policy, if you're saying the right thing, immigration is great, we need more net zero policies and so on. So we can prove that the media is completely bought out to the government by the government in an absolutely unprecedented, I would say, level in any other country in Europe in modern history. Okay, so again, in the model I suggest, in what Professor Casey and others would suggest, a laissez-faire model, you see, you have to sink or swim. The government can't prop you up. And you see, if you're forced to sink or swim, a couple of those big conglomerates will disintegrate, will go bust because they were greedy and they over-leveraged their position in the market and they expect the taxpayer to pay them out. So the good thing is that when a couple of them collapse, it opens up a new space for smaller startup companies. And because they're not reliant on the government and know that the government won't be bailing them out, they understand that they have to appeal to the public. And so the best way to appeal to the public, is to tell the truth, obviously. Of course, some will choose to be hyper-partisan. That's their business, fine. But what will happen is that you're going to have a much broader ecosystem of thoughts and opinions and ideas because you're not being paid. You have no incentive not to just report the truth as you see it or report from whatever political angle you see it. So that's the big problem in Ireland, is that the Irish media on every level, public and private, is completely beholden to the government. They can't say boo, or they're afraid of losing their funding. They're afraid of losing their, they'll be shut down or sued, which I show also is another big problem. Sinn Féin, because they don't have access to the public pocket, can't pay them out. Instead, they sue them into oblivion. So if you say anything, even remotely critical of Sinn Féin, they'll sue you. And even though they know they're not going to win, that's not the point. It's to shut you up. It's a vexatious lawsuit. So that their aim is to not win, but to bleed you out, raise the threat of you losing your house, your car, everything, your livelihood, and that will chill national reporting. So we are utterly unique in this way. There's no other country in Western Europe like us, and that's why we're lagging behind in many conversations, and that's why we're a total outlier on many issues, particularly surrounding mass immigration. Mm-hmm. Now, it is good to see McWilliams shift. Personally, he has me blocked on Twitter. I never was abusive or anything with him. Mm-hmm. But what he is saying this week is what I was saying 2 years ago. And that's not just about me. It's what many people were saying 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And But the key thing is, I'm not bitter about it because there's no point being bitter. The point is to understand that it's a greater battle, and McWilliams has reach, and he's a politician whisperer. So ultimately, it's a good thing if he does come around to this perspective. In the long term, he has to go, along with all Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and the entire rotten system that allowed all of this to happen. Because this game, he's done it before with the Celtic Tiger. When he saw the winds of change, he came out and said, "Oh, wait a minute, it's all coming down." But he made a lot of money off of it while it was going good, and same this time around as well. I believe he's now telling us that there's too much immigration from Dalkey and hanging out with Bono and these guys. So I would say that these people are playing a dirty game, an ugly game. If it helps us in the short term, good, but they're part of the system that needs to go because it's utterly morally bankrupt.
No, absolutely, and I think that's a fair point. I brought up Williams because he wouldn't be one that they could easily just say, "Oh, he's far right." It's just an
No,
interesting
far
example.
from
But
it,
as you
far
say,
from it.
we should be very wary of maybe some of those folks who go
Oh,
with
yeah. Well,
like,
yeah, but like I say, personally, yes, but you have to bite your tongue, right? That's politics. That's how it is. That um, I'm nobody, right? They're not going to listen to me. So you need these guys, as much as you might think, roll your eyes or whatever, you have to accept that that's real life, that he can have a huge sway and a huge influence.
hmm. And I appreciate that we've gone for a long time this afternoon. I most appreciate your time, Owen. So I don't want to keep you much longer. I just want to close maybe with by asking you, given the scale of the battle which we face and the many forces arrayed against us, what are some of the major trends and if maybe individuals who are giving you hope that we can
Yeah.
overcome? And where would you like to see Ireland 5 years from now, even?
Well, I think in 5 years, if there isn't a real shift, we're cooked. That's the reality that we're reaching the crescendo of a moment in it, and we have to take advantage of it. So some of the huge concrete wins I saw that I think are fantastic has been the professionalization of the marches. So the ones in Dublin there recently, I think Malachy Steenson's behind a lot of them, but just with a lot of other people. They were doing these all along. But then they would get to the end of the marches. Now there's still an element of this, but they would get to the end, and there was a bad sound system, and there was a lot of roaring into the mic, and people would just drift away. But what getting all of these feet on the ground you just couldn't ignore it, and that was brilliant. Now by the last big one in Dublin, there was a fella. He was Norty. I forget his name. But he made his whole thing is supplying flags to protesters when the protesters were coming down, thousands of them, all with their Irish flags, it looked stunning. It was absolutely stunning. And they upgraded their sound system. Now, the problem is there was still a lot of roaring into microphones and jockeying for who gets to say, and that's fine. But that needs to be the end product there needs to be professionalized behind the mic with a clear message and a clear vision and maybe some clear calls to action. But just aesthetically and just in terms of harnessing in energy and getting people on the streets and making politicians aware that people aren't happy, that has been a tremendous success. Now, there's been a few splinter groups who are coming off of that. Again, we talked some of these boys we talked about earlier who are trying to harness that and the aesthetics of that, and they're going to ruin it if they don't back off. They need to step off, and if they're going to do their own meetings, great, but make sure that they're doing it under their own advertising, their own clear branding and whatnot, because they'll destroy the great energy that's there, because these parades are a success because you have mammies and daddies, babies and strollers. The media can't say, "Hey, this is a big far right rally," when you have some old granny walking her dog in the middle of it, So that has been a huge success. This spoiled the vote over 200,000 votes is another concrete, stunning success, as were the two referenda. This was just reaffirming that success. There's, I would say humbly that the success of vandalizing Ireland, this book, has also been, I make no bones about it that this was successful because I just managed to put down on paper what a lot of people were thinking and feeling. So I think it's just, it's the success of this has been brilliant. And again, I hope, and I know from people feeding back to me that the goal of this, which was to buy it, read it, but then put it in the hands of someone over 65 who supports Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. That was my mission with this, that I know that that's being fulfilled as best as we can. So I'm very proud of that. And that's, again, another example of a concrete win. So these are all concrete wins. So visibility, hijacking the democratic vote, wider education of the public behind the media propaganda wall. These are great wins. So we just need to keep stacking these wins up and up. Like I said, we need to be able to eventually put forward an electable group of individuals. And I would imagine that all of those guys who are behind that spoil the vote campaign are sitting down somewhere today chatting about exactly this. I would have to imagine, because they obviously now lay claim to the first dibs, say, to produce something. And also, it makes sense because if you look at who they are and what they have been involved in the past, I do have hope just looking at them that they are able to create a movement that can fit the Christian conservative voter and the non-Christian conservative voter, broader aspects. So that movement today, if you look at what was written on a lot of the spoil votes, yesterday, the presidential vote, and if you look in the weeks running up to it, it managed to harness a lot of different grievances, actually. It was a lot of people who were disgusted by the rape of that 10-year-old girl. A lot of people who are disgusted by the forcing of IPAS centres into communities. Obviously, a lot of Christians supporting Maria Steen being kicked off the ballot, are not allowed on the ballot. And there's a strong, what I suppose would be like an emerging middle class urban kind of vote there, probably maybe religious, maybe not, but there's a group that seems to be, who are very often employed by the multinationals, who are beginning to wake up to the fact that, hey, we're not getting the jobs anymore. And that's crucial, because up to now it's been a strongly working class movement, which has been terrific, but it also needs to be able to embrace the middle class. So that's the key here. You need to embrace middle, working class, without either one dominating the other or just falling into stupid traps of hating one another. And you need it to be able to accommodate Christian and non-Christian, and again, the same, without taking unnecessary jabs or fighting with each other. And if you build it around the key points of, the IPAS, reforming democracy, my opinion, and what I would say there, a strong cultural revival, because that allows access to everybody, then I think you can do very, very well.
Please God. And I bought your book, which you might be able to see in front of
Good man.
on Amazon, and I know a lot of folks did. So those who maybe want to follow up this conversation and engage with your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm very active on X. That's where I am usually. I don't do any other social media because I try to keep it streamlined. So I've had a lot of people email me as well. They'll find that on my website, and good on them if they email me. I'll do my best email back. But X is where I am, and that's where, because it's so quick, you can get back to people so fast, and that's where a lot of this stuff is happening too, right? You get a lot of, you keep your finger on the pulse there as well, very much. So I'd say that's the best bet, yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sean. God bless you. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
No